Hi, this is Robert Shear with another Shear Post interview in the Ray and Bob show. Ray McGovern, 27 years in the CIA after performing his military service, and Bob Shear, who I can't claim 27 years. I could claim actually, well, frankly, the JFK files that were just released show that the government was monitoring my journalism, my writing about the CIA going back to the Kennedy assassination. You got quite a few references there. I think 19 pages or so. So I don't know if I should be flattered or alarmed that you guys were reading my stuff. Precedes you actually at the CIA, but that's a long-winded way of getting into what we're here to do today. I'm a journalist. I've covered the CIA most of my life, and you were in the intelligence community as an analyst, I must say. You weren't one of those operatives spying or doing worse to journalists. We don't have to go into that, but we're an interesting moment in our history, and trying to evaluate what's going on with the Trump administration. And after all, Donald Trump has complained about the deep state. He didn't go as far as JFK, who said he wanted to break it into 1,000 pieces and was so resentful of the CIA for misleading him on the Bay of Pigs. But nonetheless, Donald Trump has certainly raised questions about the agency. And Donald Trump and his critics really may not want to admit it. Actually, in relation to the Ukraine, this war that carried with it a real serious implication of nuclear war ending all life on this planet, because you got the U.S. involved and you got Russia clearly, and they control most of the nuclear weapons. And if Russia is certainly threatening to use them, and now peace seems to be breaking out. I'm going to turn it to the CIA, former CIA analyst here who was in charge of figuring out about Russia among the analysts and ran that for many years. Ray, what's going on? Is peace breaking out over the Ukraine?
Not quite yet, Bob, but it's getting closer. Let me just start with the observation that we have a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde fellow in the White House now. There is some prospect for peace in Ukraine, and that is big. It's just 4 or 5 months ago that I was among those, and I've been around a while, saying that we were closer to nuclear war with Russia than at any time in all the decades during which I served. That's no longer the case. That's good. That's Dr. Jekyll. Okay, how about Hyde? Well, I can't do any kind of interview without mentioning the genocide that's going on in Gaza that could stop if it weren't Mr. Hyde. Okay, it could stop if the president said stop the genocide, and he's not doing that. Rather he is furnishing the arms and military support, the financing, and the political support to let Netanyahu wipe out the rest of the Palestinians in Gaza. So that just put that on the record. Now, with respect to Ukraine, there have been extensive negotiations and a very accelerated, unprecedentedly accelerated pace. Most recently in Jeddah yesterday and the day before, and it looks like the U.S. announced now. It was just 2 hours ago that the United States and Russia agreed to ensure safe navigation, eliminate the use of force, and prevent the use of commercial vessels for military purposes in the Black Sea. In other words, the commercial vessels from carrying arms supplies to Ukraine. Um, it did not specify when this would go into effect. That's interesting, you know. Further on, the Washington Post, from which I'm reading, says, Zelensky, who is the proverbial fly in the ointment here, well, no, Post doesn't say that, McGovern says that. Zelensky said he remained unsure about how this agreement could possibly be implemented. Uh, there was there's no ban on attacks on infrastructure. Well, there was never an agreement tax on infrastructure. It was on energy infrastructure. So Zelensky is being duplicitous as usual. What else? Well, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has already chimed in and he said, this is really nice that we were agreeable in these negotiations, quote, but we cannot take this man's word for it, referring to Zelensky. Now, this all has to do with the grain deal that was agreed on a couple of years ago, and there were provisions in there that were never implemented. Turkey, believe it or not, was supposed to be implemented. These ships were never inspected. Some of them, we believe, were selling arms. It when after the Russians renewed it once, then they just let it lapse. So that's what they're trying to get reimbursed, restarted. And also, there were obligations that the two sides undertook that Russia would have financial access to certain systems in the West. That was never implemented. So they're trying to redo this agreement that was worked on several years ago. Now, what does it mean? That means the United States is chomping at the bit to make sure that there's the appearance of progress. Earlier today, Lavrov seemed oblivious to the fact that the U.S. was going to make the announcement because he said there won't be any announcements just yet because our leaders, namely Putin and Trump, are dealing with this thing. Then all of a sudden, the White House comes out with these initiatives. The caveat, of course, is Zelensky hasn't bought into this. Not only that, but the Ukrainians are continuing to attack major Russian air bases and oil depots. So this thing may be on paper, and the United States may want to create the aura that this thing will work. But Zelensky, again, is a fly in the ointment. We'll have to see, and the Russians certainly are not completely on board for this because these announcements were from the U.S. White House, not from Russia. And Lavrov, as I said before, is very skeptical. So these things go along. The good news is that they're talking. The good news that they're being civil to one another, and also that the Ukrainians sent a very high delegation to talk with U.S. middle level experts in Saudi Arabia over the last 2 days to iron out the kind of technical details that need to be ironed out. I think all told, there were about 12 hours of negotiations. That's a good thing. It's better to jaw than to war, as Winston Churchill once said.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing I'm the journalist and you're the CIA expert, being cautious and diplomatic. But I don't read it this way. I mean, Trump, and yes, we could talk about Gaza. We have before, and I'm not presenting Trump as an enlightened saint, nor am I saying he should win the Nobel Peace Prize, although Obama got it for doing nothing. There is some sign of progress here, and what is really a very alarming war, in which and all wars are alarming, and certainly I'm not taking anything away from the significance of the what I would consider genocide in Gaza. However, this is the hotspot for the world right now because these are the two nuclear armed nations that if they get into it, it's the end of all life. And Trump did pledge to bring about peace. And it does seem in these negotiations, whatever Zelensky's objection, he's going to go along with the United States. That's pretty clear. Europe is not going to finance this whole war and without U.S. backing. And it seems to be very clear that the issue from the Russian point of view about Ukraine being part of NATO or NATO expansion, that has been resolved, at least in U.S. policy, that whatever peace agreement, they're not going to have that. There will be normalization of trade that seems to be involved here in the Baltic Sea, both for Ukraine and Russia. And it's very important, obviously, that there be neutrality, free shipping there for the well being of people living in Ukraine or Russia, and shipping involved, the selling of farm products, and so forth. So I think it is a hold the presses moment because Trump has actually gotten these two warring parties to accept the inevitability of peace as opposed to a continued fighting backed by the United States. That's the real issue. When they were in
No,
the White House,
that's wrong. That's wrong, Bob. He hasn't gotten both parties to agree. He's gotten the Russians to agree. He has not gotten the Ukrainians to
yes, but
agree,
what I'm trying to
and
say,
that's
and
big.
again, I'm not a CIA analyst, but I am a journalist, and it seems to me the Ukrainian people would not continue a war, nor would Europe support a war if the U.S. withheld support, military support, diplomatic support, and so forth. Trump is holding a lot of cards here, the good cards. He knows it. He stated it at the White House meeting. And Trump doesn't like to be embarrassed when he makes these big sales pitches, when he makes the art of the deal. And his representative there is a fellow real estate operator. And I think it's pretty clear now that there is a very impressive movement towards finally ending this terrible bloodbath, and so I'll let you have the last word on this, but I really think the soundbite here. I'm not a big fan of sound bites. Is that peace is breaking out in a really very dangerous part of the world right now. And I think it'd be pretty difficult for Zelensky to go against Trump. If the Russians play ball with Trump and they settle for what he's offering, which it seems they are, I don't see Western Europe backing Zelensky and holding out, and I don't see the Ukrainian people backing Zelensky and holding out.
Well, Bob, if you're talking about months from now, I would agree with you. I'm in the here and now. Zelensky and his government have not agreed to cease efforts to join NATO. They have not agreed even to abide by the terms of that 30-day ceasefire with respect to energy infrastructure. So they're going at it hot and heavy, and they're aided and abetted by these clowns in Europe who don't really know which end is up and won't stop providing whatever political support they can, trying to convince Zelensky, no, just hold on, we'll support you for as long as it takes. Now, that's very complicated. As for the Russians are very appreciative of having an interlocutor, like a president that will talk to them, like a secretary of state that will talk to them. Okay, that's big. Okay, they're going to resume normal relationships. That is also big. Now, after the last bilateral summit on the phone, um, Peskov, Putin's spokesperson, said, "Guess what? We have trust now. There is trust between our two leaders. Each are hell bent and determined." He didn't say hell bent. Each are determined to make this work. Now, that trust, after all the treachery, after all the perceived and real climb downs from pledges that the U.S. and the West has made over the last several years with respect to Ukraine, that is very big. So the good news is there's not going to be a nuclear war because of Ukraine. The bad news is that Ukrainian troops, Russian troops, are going to keep killing each other until Russia has finished the job, unless Zelensky is replaced, or unless he comes around to realize that he's lost the game. And not even our top military brass is willing to acknowledge that Zelensky or the Ukrainian armed forces are finished. Today there was a briefing, and before the Senate Intelligence Committee, and well, okay, I'll concede that you. They didn't say that Putin had already lost in Ukraine, which is what they said 3 years ago, 2 years ago. They said, well, it's going to take a long time, and if the Europeans keep supplying all these several months and all that kind of stuff, and so there's still hope. Well, and the Russians are going to run out of ammunition by and by. So we have a complex situation here where even Trump is circumscribed in what he can do, mostly because of the situation on the ground, and because the Russians know they have the upper hand, and they're not going to settle for a deal that Zelensky himself questions and said, "I don't know how it's going to be implemented." So it's complicated. The prospects are better than they were 5 months ago, but there's still a lot of things to iron out.
Well, on this issue, I think Trump is now in the position that Nixon was in when he made his opening to China. And we'll see, by the way, what Trump does in his relation to China with the tariffs and everything. But when it comes to not the wounded of this world, not the lesser people like the Palestinians who have no state and have no nuclear weapons and don't even have a serious state backing them anywhere. You can go after the vulnerable and push them around. But in this new multipolar world, where you have the rearrangement of alliances and so forth, which Trump is recognizing and breaking actually with this supremacy of the Western European perspective and so forth. It seems to me this is a Nixon moment. Does not mean world peace or justice for everyone, certainly not the Palestinians, but regarding just this very fraught, dangerous situation of the Ukraine and Russia, which is a holdover from the Cold War. It's actually a holdover from World War II, grievances about which side were you on and so forth. During that, and nationalism and what happened to the Iron Curtain spreading and so forth. I think we're seeing the end of this Cold War history. I'll go out on a limb here, and I hope the CIA is monitoring my observations. So when there's the next leak of documents, I'll look. I think pretty good 5, 10 years from now. That doesn't mean we'll have world peace, but it does mean we're moving to a situation where the U.S. has to recognize the power of others, whether it's China, whether it's BRICS, whether it's Saudi Arabia, and the established Arab governments, that you can't be the lone cowboy out there settling all the disputes. And amazingly enough, Trump seems to have some sense of the limit of power when it comes to the big players. That's important. It didn't seem that Biden, to the degree that he was conscious as president, was aware of this. When he was not president, as a senator, he had moments of showing some sense of the limits of power, but not as president. It was incredibly disappointing for years in the White House. But with Trump, at least there's a recognition you got to cut deals. He has said it, and in this case, for the very reason you mentioned, the war was not going to be won by the Ukraine. The Western European fantasy that they would get rid of Putin and get rid of any kind of Russian nationalism, that's not going to happen. And Trump is recognizing that, and I think it's a game changer.